This is the sixth video of the series of the theory development in educational leadership. In this series of videos, I'll introduce the major events and theoretical views in each decade of the field of educational leadership. This video is about educational leadership in the 1990s. You can find the rest of the video series in the description section below. Since the 1950s, educational leadership scholars have been searching for the knowledge base and scholarly boundaries that could define a field. Here are the two line charts I created to illustrate the rise and fall of the topics in articles published in Educational Administration Quarterly. The chart on the top shows the number of the articles on the topic of epistemology of educational leadership. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy concerned with knowledge. The articles on the epistemology of educational leadership explored the knowledge base and the scholarly boundaries that could define the field of educational leadership. This type of articles reached a peak in the 1980s, followed by the rise of the articles on research reviews and reflections in the 1990s. 4 decades after the field was established in the 1950s, the field of educational leadership went through a big expansion. The expansion was also driven by the joining of many new members from different parts of the world to the field of educational leadership. Some scholars called the 1990s the Big Bang period. Organizational constructs such as organizational culture and climate and loosely coupled system remained popular. Instructional leadership continued to gain popularity in the 1990s. In the broad field of leadership, major leadership theories were neo-charismatic leadership. They include charismatic leadership, transformational leadership, and visionary leadership. I talk about the origin of charisma and charismatic leadership in an earlier video on what happened before educational leadership was established as an academic field. You can find the link of the video in the description section below. Charismatic leadership draws its name from the Greek word charisma, meaning divine gift. Charisma was considered as something that leaders had, and that something set leaders apart from ordinary people. A charismatic leader was treated as a savior, a superman, and a hero. But that view of charismatic leadership was problematic. If charisma was born, then how to explain that a person's charisma can dramatically increase or decrease after his or her death? Nowadays, charisma is considered as a person's perceived capacity to inspire devotion and enthusiasm. It is not something that leaders have, but rather how followers perceive their leaders. Charisma can have a dark side because many charismatic leaders are narcissistic and delusional. Some scholars consider charisma as a curse, not a cure for social problems. Charismatic leadership was introduced as a theory to organizational research by Robert House in the 1970s. It didn't enter the field of educational leadership until the 1990s through a related leadership theory called transformational leadership, which is still popular among educational leadership researchers and practitioners. Among the 3 leadership styles under the category of neo-charismatic leadership, transformational leadership entered the field of educational leadership in the 1990s. Here are the factors of transformational leadership. Both of the fourth and fifth factors of transformational leadership are about charisma. Idealized influence comes from leaders' values, beliefs, and a sense of mission. The policy context at the national level in the United States may explain the popularity of instructional leadership, transformational leadership, school effectiveness, and organizational theory in educational leadership. In my last video, I talked about George H.W. Bush positioned himself as an education president in his presidential campaign. After taking office in 1989, the Bush administration continued the debate over education reform and shifted the debate focus from school input, which was funding, to school output, which were student achievement and academic standards. This reform-oriented federal role in education persisted throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s. In 1993, the Democratic President Bill Clinton took office. Prior to his time in the White House, Clinton was a governor of Arkansas from 1983 to 1992. In his presidential campaign, Clinton claimed himself as a former education governor, as he strongly advocated education reform. Clinton appointed his wife, Hillary Clinton, to lead a committee to draft higher demands for Arkansas schools. In the White House, the Clinton administration played a decisive role in education reform through standards and accountability measures. In 1994, Clinton signed the Goals 2000 Educate America Act into law. The Clinton administration rejected the previous Bush administration's efforts to eliminate the federal role in education. Instead, the Clinton administration expanded the federal role in education greatly. His administration increased investment for schools and embraced standards and accountability. With Clinton's re-election in 1996, these efforts for an expanded federal role in education were solidified in 1990s. With policymakers focused on academic standards, student achievement, and accountability measures, instructional leadership and transformational leadership were appealing to educational leadership researchers as they explored how to improve school effectiveness, motivate teachers and staff, and enhance student learning. In the 1990s, critical theory, which was proposed a decade earlier, became one of the most vigorous challenges to the value-neutral approach of traditional theories in educational leadership. From a critical theory perspective, the goal of education is social justice and equity. Curriculum and instruction should be oriented to social justice and equity. Students should be encouraged to make a difference for those who are not as fortunate as themselves. School discipline practices, such as suspensions, expulsions, and referrals to law enforcement, should take into consideration students' culture, family background, and the intent of student behaviors. Critical theory does not specifically address marginalized groups by gender, race, social class, and other factors of social characterization. As a result, the theories that specifically address gender, race, and social class begin to emerge. Those new theories include feminist theories, which make gender a focus, critical race theory, which makes race a focus, and queer theory, which makes LGBT and sexual culture a focus. Since then, this line of theoretical views of educational leadership has blossomed and became the mainstream theoretical views in the field of educational leadership. I visualized the data from National Center for Education Statistics on school principals by gender. As you can see from the chart, in the 1990s, the majority of school principals in the United States were male. But this trend began to change in the 2000s. In 2011, the number of female school principals surpassed that of male principals, and that change has kept its momentum over the last 2 decades. So it was not a coincidence that the topic on female leadership gained popularity in the 1990s. I also visualized the data from National Center for Education Statistics on school principals by their racial composition. Unlike the dramatic change in the percentage of principals by gender over the years, there was no big change in the racial composition of school principals in the United States. The percentage of black school principals hovered between 10% to 11%. The percentage of Asian school principals fluctuated around 1%. The percentage of American Indian and Alaska Native school principals remained below 1%. As for white school principals, the percentage fell from 84.3% in 1993 to 77.7% in 2017. In comparison, there was an increase in the percentage of Hispanic school principals and principals with a racial background from 2 or more races. The racial composition of school principals may explain why critical race theory became increasingly popular among educational leadership scholars. The Big Bang expansion of the field of educational leadership in the 1990s brought an earlier discussion into question. It was the discussion about whether the field should have a grand overarching theory, which was one of the goals of the theory movement in the 1950s and 1960s. Proponents of theoretical diversity, including Griffiths, who was an influential leader of the theory movement, argued that a variety of theoretical views served the field well, because the field was interested in issues ranging from staff evaluation to school effectiveness to school-parent relationships to policy issues. The scope of the field was too broad and too complex to be limited to one theory. Here is another important education law in the United States. In 1990, the United States Congress reauthorized Education for All Handicapped Children Act and changed the title to Individual with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA. IDEA is a legislation that ensures students with a disability are provided with free, appropriate public education that is tailored to their individual needs. The goal of IDEA is to provide children with disabilities the same opportunities for education as those who don't have a disability. IDEA was previously known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act from 1975 to 1990. The IDEA funding became a presidential campaign focus among Democratic presidential candidates from 2019 to 2020. This is the graph I created to show which Democratic candidates' presidential campaign proposed their plan for increasing IDEA funding. This data were collected in March 2020. When Congress passed the original version of IDEA in 1975, it promised to cover 40% of the additional costs of educating students with disabilities. In 2018, the federal government covered less than 15% of these costs. Many Democratic presidential candidates called for full federal funding for IDEA. Former Vice President Joe Biden later won the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. On his campaign website, Biden promised to fully fund IDEA within 10 years. By contrast, in the Trump administration's proposed funding for the U.S. Department of Education, the 2021 budget will cover only about 13% of the costs associated with serving IDEA students, despite the federal government's original promise to fund the IDEA at 40%. It remains to be seen whether the Biden administration could keep his campaign promise to fully fund IDEA if he wins the 2020 election. This video is about the theory development in the field of educational leadership in the 1990s. There was an expansion in the field in terms of the topics and the scholars across the world. Organizational theory remained popular. Instructional leadership continued to gain popularity in the 1990s. Transformational leadership entered the field of educational leadership. Critical theory was popular. Other theories that specifically address gender, race, and social class began to emerge. They include feminist theories, critical race theory, and queer theory. In 1990, the United States Congress reauthorized the Education for All Handicapped Children Act and changed the title to IDEA. The IDEA funding became a presidential campaign focus among Democratic presidential candidates in 2019 and 2020. When Congress passed the original version of IDEA in 1975, it promised to cover 40% of the additional costs of educating students with disabilities. In 2018, the federal government covered less than 15% of those costs. Many Democratic presidential candidates called for full federal funding for IDEA. In the next video, I'll talk about the theory development of educational leadership in the 2000s.